think one of the fun things to do is not only experiment in trying to see what happens organically when prompted. I think that's exciting as an artist to just say, what am I not thinking about? Because the words on the page will reveal what you were thinking about.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Here we are about a month away from the start of StoryADay May 2024, the 15th anniversary of the challenge. And I'm bringing you a reprise of an interview that I did for the podcast a few years ago with the wonderful Windy Lynn Harris, who took us through 7 ways to think about flash fiction, which of course, in a challenge like this, your stories are going to be necessarily quite short on a lot of the days. And there's nothing quite like Windy's exuberant enthusiasm for flash fiction and short stories, unless of course you're talking about mine. So the two of us together had a really great time talking about this, and I wanted to share this because it's so inspiring, and hopefully it will get you ready thinking about some things that you can be preparing in this month in the lead up to StoryADay May. If you haven't signed up yet, come over to storyaday.org, just fill in that box at the top of the front page, and I will register you as a participant this year, which means I'll send you all of the prompts. It's going to be great. But here you are. I'm going to hand you over to past Julie and my interview with Windy Lynn Harris. My guest today is Windy Lynn Harris, who writes personal essays, short stories, flash nonfiction and novels from her desk in sunny Phoenix, Arizona. She's the author of the fabulous Writing and Selling Short Stories and Personal Essays, the essential guide to getting your work published. And it really is. It's the essential modern guide to getting your work published. And if you don't have a copy on your desk already, you should have. She's a frequent speaker at literary events around the country. Her work has been published in places like the Literary Review, the 34th Parallel, Pithead Chapel, the Sunlight Press, Literary Mama, Sassy and Cahoots, and many other journals. You can find her at windylynharris.com. And you can also find her on an earlier episode of the StoryADay podcast. But a little known secret about Windy Lynn Harris is that she is a repeat participant in StoryADay May. And so you're going to hear us talking about that. Windy is going to give you some amazing tips today for ways to write flash fiction. So Windy Lynn Harris, so great to have you here again, and welcome.
Thank you, Julie. You know, I love what you do. I love the StoryADay May adventure. I participate every single year, and I'm glad to be back. So thanks for the invitation.
And you have very kindly agreed to talk to us about flash fiction, which of course, if you're writing a story a day for a month, things of flash length are going to be probably a big part of that. But there's so much more to flash than just the length. So why did you want to talk to me about flash?
Well, I think flash, first of all, comes up. It scrapes up out of us as artists during our prompt work. The best flash comes when we're not looking for it. You know, longer stories, especially for all of us who are also working on novels, there's a lot of thinking that has to go on, a lot of planning that has to go on. But a flash piece is so organic, intentionally organic for this art form, that you get to just come as you are, come to a prompt and see what happens. And when you're just being your open, most honest, vulnerable, willing to write self, flash comes up. So I think it's important to talk about because, you know, during our StoryADay adventure coming up in May, sometimes you're going to realize that, okay, I looked at this piece and I really like it. And I think it's meant to be a long piece. And sometimes you get a little something, just like this nugget of gold. And you look at it and you're like, I feel like there's heat there, but it doesn't really belong somewhere that I can imagine just yet. You might be onto a flash piece. So I think for all writers who really study what's happening with flash and kind of what flash is, they then have another set of litmus test items to look at when they review their work. They're like, you know what? It's not a traditional story, but it's definitely something. And now I understand how to go back into this work and how to edit this work and what to look for and elevate before I send it out. So I think it's really, it's just perfect for what you do to really just know about flash.
Can you give us like a definition of what flash fiction is?
Yes. And I think, you know, the easy definition is it's a creative piece that's very short. Back when I started writing flash, it was 10 years ago, Even up to 7 years ago, the length was up to 1,500 words, which feels extravagant these days. The genre has just shortened a little bit. And so now the definition word length wise is that Flash is something under 1,000 words. But a lot of the magazines that are acquiring really condense further, and their category expectation is 500 words or less. And that's a terrific challenge as an artist to say, I need to tell a story in 500 words or less. That is a wonderful way to kind of dig deep and say, if I'm going to compress, I'm going to be leaving out parts of a story, but I need you to feel and sense these parts of the story. So it challenges you to be really clever with your word choice, with your sentences, inferring things. And so Flash just feels a little different. It smells a little different, and it is different on purpose. It's beautiful. It kind of reminds me of poetry in ways that it's just not really a full story, but it's definitely something gorgeous. Although those two art forms they became their own units organically and separately, but you can see a lot of crossover. The definition, I would say, goes a little further in this, where a traditional short story, even something very, very short, can be traditionally written if it has a beginning, middle, and end. And I know that's simplistic, but yeah, we're storytellers. Beginning, middle, end is just ingrained in us. And even if you look a little further, you're like, there's a story arc. Beginning, middle, end, it leads us to a high point, maybe an epiphany, and then we have this ending. But a Flash piece doesn't need to have those traditional beginning, middle, end signposts in your work. It can be much different from that. So here's what you're looking for instead. When you look back on a piece and you're like, maybe it's a Flash piece happening here, you're looking for 3 things: emotion, movement, and resonance. So that doesn't really mean a story arc at all. It means you are setting a mood. You are giving us a moment in time to feel. And the piece does have movement. You take us through story elements, and you end on this moment, usually with a concrete image that leaves us a little breathless, going, I get it. I understand what the story is about. And one way you can kind of look through your work and discover, maybe you had a Flash prompt or just a regular prompt and you ended up describing an apple. And when you look back on it, you're like, wow, that was beautiful description. I feel like I was getting to something. But as an artist, maybe you were just describing an apple that's going to be part of a bigger orchard, that's going to have, some animals and birds are going to be maybe your characters. You can kind of feel it. And I would know that because my descriptions were just that. Just descriptions. Nothing really happened to this apple or in this world just yet. I've just started describing, so I know I'm just at the beginning of something really cool. It's going to be a longer piece. But if I look at my work and I see that I've written about this apple and I've inferred some things and I've talked about the teeth mark that are in that apple, and I have then showed maybe a bigger setting piece and I've given some specifics, maybe by the end of a Flash piece, I realized that this apple has been poisoned and it's next to a dead body. That's a Flash piece. That's when you're like, aha, she didn't say all of these things exactly. I don't know about the murder. I don't know what happened, but here is now the world we're in. So that's where Flash steps in, gives us a chance. We can do a lot of things with those very interesting inferential pieces.
That's fantastic. What a great example as well, because people often ask, about the shape of a short story or knowing where to end a short story. And to be given, one of the reasons I love Flash as well is because you have the freedom to sort of break those beginning, middle, end rules. Like the beginning's there, but it might not be in the piece you wrote, right? It's implied.
Yes. Yeah. And also, there is, we talk about cadence and pacing and different things that happen. Flash tends to be, it has such immediacy that it's almost like a news feed. You're being handed all this information. That's another way to kind of see what, if you've written something and it's starting to smell like a Flash piece, look for that immediacy. It's an urgent message. And I think that Flash, it has some, variations. There's a lot of things you can do, and that might be interesting. I've got like 7 of my favorite flash forms that you might recognize in yourself. And one of them will be the prompt that we'll be doing.
Excellent, excellent. So in the absence of the beginning, middle, and end rule, we've stuck with the rule of 3, though, because you've got emotion, movement, and resonance.
Yeah, love that.
I think
like stick that landing.
I think resonance. You alluded to this. The end of the story. It can be really helpful to have a concrete image.
Yeah,
Or
I just feel like in this art form specifically, the reader is led through very specific images, specific description. Nothing can be vague. The shorter a piece you're writing, the more specific you need to be, because you are adding a lot of information. So instead of having the chance to say, a woman grabbed her keys and got in her truck, and then she went here, you can give a lot more information if you have her grabbing a keychain that has a pacifier attached to the end of it just in case, and she goes out to a very broken down truck. All of a sudden you know something about her life. So when you're writing in Flash, you do need to do that, where you're always giving a lot more story than you're normally would. Like, the pace of a novel, you can wander around for a long time before you know this woman has a child. But in Flash, if it's important, you need to show something that says she has a baby right there in the beginning.
that's a great example of how to do that, which, of course, you can wander around in a novel, but there are going to be times when having that skill under your belt, having that practice of being able to just paint that one line and tell somebody so much about the character is always going to come in handy.
Oh, it does for every project that ever comes up. I think it has shortened my novel writing because I'm always condensing, I'm always packing information in, and it's tighter, and it does kind of affect your overall style and elevate things. Flash writing is such a great training tool. And what I love is, me and I love getting published. I love helping other writers get published. It is so welcome in the literary landscape. It sells fast, it sells multiple times a year. So the market is really open. When you're talking about Flash, a lot of people ask me, but what about the editing? Is it just like, you just throw it out there and it's what happens? And the answer is absolutely not. You're an artist and you need to go in there and you need to edit no matter how short the piece is. In fact, the shorter the piece is, the more tuned in you need to be to the absolute specific details that you are showing. And, where is this first line? Does it resonate with the last line? Have you really shown something? Where is the movement? You really need to be on your game, even more so than when you're writing something longer. So the editing time isn't going to be that long because you're only talking about maybe 2 pages worth of work, maybe even 1 page. But you can't just dash anything and throw it out into the marketplace. I would never advise a writer to do that. Use your skills and really spend the time recrafting and purposely saying, this is a Flash and I know what I'm going to do with it. And I understand what I want that resonant moment to be for my readers.
That's interesting, because I have found that since I've been doing, StoryADay for 10 years, it occurred to me that it would be easier to tell the same story for a, longer time. And I've started writing novels. But the idea of editing novels, I always found kind of overwhelming. I know a lot of people do, but editing something like a short story or a flash fiction, you get so much satisfaction out of it. And it's so not, I think, overwhelming, that I've actually learned to appreciate and look forward to revising by working on revising short fiction.
Oh, I agree. I think that's a great result of working in shorts is, you understand, like, here's what I'm tackling first. It's the big stuff, and then the littler stuff, and then the smaller stuff. The one thing that I am not enjoying with novel work versus the shorts is the time period between when you have the dirty draft that just doesn't sound very good until you get to the polished draft. There's so much more time in a novel before you really get to see the beauty, where with our shorts, we get there this month, maybe, certainly this spring. But with the novel, it might be ugly until next year. And sometimes it's really hard. So I love coming back to our short pieces especially flash, and being able to feel that success moment again a little bit faster. I really do crave that once in a while. I'm like, am I ever going to get this project done? And then you come back to flash and you're like, yes, that's what I like, this rush. And then I do get to finish my editing and I do get to send it out and feel good about it. So
yeah, we need those little victories and that moment of finishing.
A lot of victories.
We get a lot of victories in StoryADay May.
Yes, I'm so looking forward to it. I think it's just such a great program to have every year, Julie. I'm just glad you do this.
Oh, thank you. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that sense of movement in a flash fiction story? Because
it is important, because it has to be story. So it has to go beyond description, and that's where movement comes in. So movement, if you were to compare it to something like our short stories or our novel work, you kind of have that narrative arc happening. In your flash piece, you don't need to come to the same shape of an arc, but you need to have the story moving forward. So every sentence needs to lead to the next sentence, to the next sentence. There's no stalling out. There's no going back. It's forward motion, and you're building and building and building. So that movement might look a little different depending on the type of flash that you ended up writing. And we'll kind of we can talk about those different styles. But it does mean that you're building, 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 and you're illuminating your reader every step along the way. It's not just beauty for beauty's sake. It's thematic beauty. You are leading us somewhere, and that will get you to the point, of that last line has to be a killer. And at that moment, the reader says, I get it. I get what you did there. I see it. We need to feel it.
Yeah, so let's take you up on that and talk about the different types of flash then.
My favorite 7. I mean, there's probably others that are going to come up with you, but here are my favorite 7. The first one to talk about would be the vignette. And this is where it's just kind of the definition of, really great prose that doesn't have the story arc. It's not just a description, a vignette. So when you're thinking about a vignette, it's an illustrative scene, and you want to make sure that it has meaning beyond the existence of just this scene that she is sitting. If it's a woman sitting in front of a fireplace, it could be a nice little vignette about that, a descriptive vignette. But by the end of it, we need to understand something she has lived through, something she is currently living through, an event, that type of thing. Story needs to happen. And that's where you'll go through the movement of the piece, and really through your descriptions, you'll let us know. By the end, we're like, she just burned the neighbor's dog or something. You know what I mean? Like, there's something that we realize happened and we go, oh, wow. So if it was descriptive, you would need to then step into a moment for her and, some sort of story arc. Maybe it's going to be a longer piece, but if we get it by the end, it's a flash piece.
I love it.
My work has been so dark this last week. I'm having so much fun. So pardon my descriptions. The next one to talk about is very similar to a vignette, where it's a character sketch, where you are really talking about some specific details about an individual person, but it's a suggestive picture that you are putting together. You've got physical attributes, psychological attributes, habits, etc. But you're building a picture that the reader could extrapolate from, where by the end of it, again, we know something. There has been some movement. It's not just a beautiful woman. It is now, we realize at the end, a woman who has just arrived on Earth, or she has just committed murder. She has, she's afraid to get married and she's decided she's not going to. Something has happened along the way. A really fun one that would be great. Sometimes you could just tackle a prompt this way, even if the prompt doesn't ask you to, is a diary entry. When you are just in that second person voice and you're writing a letter either to an audience or to yourself as if it's a diary, you get to embody some voice, maybe yours, maybe it becomes a character voice, but you're ruminating and exploring, and you can be judgmental. You can lie, you can overemphasize or obsess about something. And those become really interesting, powerful pieces that tell a lot. There's definite movement in there. If you're, talking about something in your diary that's shameful or, difficult or sad or something. And I think some great works, if you read a lot of flash fiction, come from this kind of prompt.
I
And
love those kind of stories. I mean,
I
and I didn't really realize why until you said that, but I think it is. It's that freedom to like be the voice in the head, which is more extreme than anything we would ever say out loud.
Absolutely. Like we sometimes there's a lot of self-editing that we do, and it's a tough thing to go beyond that and say, no, I'm just gonna no one has to read this draft, and really allow. Some of the best stuff comes out when you just allow, and you're like, I don't want anybody to think that would be me. We don't. Readers never do. They never point to us with an accusing finger and say, you must be a terrible person. They're just swept away in this story. So just let it flow. Just let it go. The next one to talk about is, I would say, my absolute favorite, lists. And, Flash, when published, sometimes is in blocks of paragraph, and sometimes it looks like something completely different. It could be a recipe card or, something different. It can be a list. And so my favorite grocery list or a to-do list or goal list, it can tell you a lot about a situation or a character. Story can happen. If you write them with the effect of showing that person's life, their struggles, their failures, something that has story in it, it really tests the reader's inferential powers to go through just a list. And we see if you're building your list to evoke something, to tell us something about this character. It's really a fascinating thing to read. It's so much fun to write.
And short story readers tend to like that. Like, not everybody likes to read short stories, but the people who do love to pick at the puzzle.
Yeah, I do. You and I do. We're always looking at the mechanics, and it's so much fun to play with the mechanics through Flash. It just say, I'm going to take this prompt and it's going to be a list for Mary. It's going to be a diary entry. The next one is so common. Fables have always been pieces of Flash in our world. And it's so fun to maybe approach a prompt and say, what if it was this imaginary world? Fables always represent something beyond the surface meaning. And we know that, when you think back on, Aesop's fables, always by the end of it, you're like, I shouldn't do that. There are these moral moments. So if you've got something you kind of want to, shame people on, or, whatever it is, educate them, illuminate them. A fable is a really cool way to approach it, because it kind of teases us in as a reader, where we're like, oh, it's going to be a sweet little story. And then you're like, oh, I see where you went. I can see a lot of that happening with today's news media and things like that. There's plenty of ways to take what you're absorbing and give a fable. Prose poem would be the next one to talk about. Prose poem and Flash, they are just these wonderful cousins who, touch and cross. They don't necessarily, they're a different beast. And really the difference comes if you have been studying poetry, you sort of end up ingrained with the history and the mechanics behind poetry. And there's so many poetic forms. When somebody has written a poem, it might look kind of like a Flash piece that is a prose poem. But if the writer has not studied poetry, it kind of leans over here where I am, where I look at poetry. I read a lot of poetry, but I don't study it. I like to have that as I appreciate it over here. Like I appreciate sculpture. I don't want to participate. I just want to enjoy it. So when I'm writing prose poems and they are a piece of Flash, it looks a little different than maybe a colleague who has studied poetry a lot, but it's always going to have alliteration and personification and figurative images, and really maybe even has an interesting cadence pattern. That's kind of what those look like. But again, you're not asked to have beginning, middle, end. That's when you kind of know artistically, you're like, this one's a prose poem. It is not going to become a short story. And the last one I want to talk about, so much fun to work on, soliloquies and rants, where you are a first person telling it like it is. There's nothing I like better than a good rant. And we can all come up with that once in a while, at least once in May, something you might be having a day where a good rant is warranted. And it can be so fun to watch the movement moments of, where you just watch a character go through. You've got an intense voice for a soliloquy or a rant, and they are definitely delivering a message. And you want to make sure, even though you're in that first person zone, that you are still giving concrete images the entire time, even though it's more spoken word, because that's what gives such such breadth to the small amount of words. It really takes the reader beyond what you have right here. So those might be, some of the more difficult when you're in the editing mode, but they're so much fun to read and they get published all of the time. So those are my favorite 7. Other things come up. Sometimes it is a recipe. Sometimes it's maybe a how-to manual. Whatever comes to you, this art form wants it. This is where to express it. And magazines in the literary world can't get enough of it. So why not just show up, arrive, and let it fly?
Wow. First of all, thank you for the insider tips on the publishing world, because I know, that's what your book's all about. It was about writing and selling the short story.
I try not to pressure writers because publishing is just one of the parts of what we do, and yet it's so open to us. Why wouldn't one play?
Well, that's I don't want people to worry about publishing, but hearing that there's an area where they're actually looking for your work and how to do it is so helpful. So thank you for that. And also, I think everybody should just pause this and rewind and go through that last section and make some notes, because there's so much gold in there. So much fun. I was never sure what the definition of a prose poem was, how it differed from...
Really, I think it depends on the artist and your training and your background. It's just almost one of those things. When we go to market, you could call it a poem. You could call it a flash piece. But the editor on the other side, if you say something is a prose poem, they're going to understand this moment that you're in. If you are going to a definite poetry only magazine, the history of your study is evident in your fingerprints, and they will understand that and look for that on the page. So maybe that isn't the place you send it. Instead, if you have not been professionally trained as a poet, you send it to a literary magazine as a flash piece, and then you will sell it.
That's a great tip.
We just gotta, know who you are and where you are. I love that, Flash is open to absolutely every single writer, every style, whether you love sci-fi, whether you, actually would love to be writing some Western pieces, whether your genre are very, very literary, or you just love having little bits and pieces of beauty. Your voice matters here. Your voice is welcome here. And for you to just have a place to explore is really, I think, such a gift to us as writers, to just explore, create, and get published.
So speaking of voice, I think one of the things I noticed during StoryADay night, one of the reasons I encourage people to take part is that if you're writing a bunch of stuff, you're going to discover your voice. And you say in your book, your voice becomes more evident as you create a body of work. So do you have any tips for people who are confused, or maybe don't understand what we mean by voice?
Oh, absolutely. It is an industry term that kind of it's got some dual purpose. Sometimes when you're talking to editors, they're talking about your voice. And that's where kind of what I was talking about in the book. Your voice as an artist becomes a little evident once we see a body of work. But sometimes when you're talking to an editor, they're talking about the voice of your character. Those are two separate things, and you want them to be separate. Anytime you want to go into a character's head, you're giving them diction and this vernacular and this history behind what they say and reasons for saying what they're saying. They have an agenda. They're trying to move a conversation along. All of that, yes, is voice, but it's a character's voice. So when we're talking about you as the artist, we're talking about this sort of fingerprint that's just in your DNA. And the way to access your voice is to step out of the way and not really affect your voice by anything. You want to be well-read. You want to be studying as much as you can, experimenting in writing. And all of the times when you're really just being yourself on the page, this authenticity comes through. And there's nobody else who is going to have the same diction and cadence and syntax as you when it comes right down to it. So for you to just allow that to happen naturally and not try to affect it is the best plan. And when we are early in our studies, a lot of times we're thinking, well, I don't sound intelligent enough, or I don't sound literary enough, or I don't sound like in my mystery work. Maybe I really want to sound like some of the best mystery writers that I've listened to. And so it's good to just study what other people are doing, but you can only access who you really are. Your voice is unique. It's already in there. You don't need to change it. In fact, changing it would be a real detriment to you as an artist. So what you need to do is just gently just worship that voice. Just let it come out. Be your most authentic self every time you can. And you will create a body of work that just, it sounds like you. You know, when all is said and done, I look back at all of the body of work I've created, and there are some different genres I've played in, some different things, but I know it's me. My critique partners would know exactly whose work that is, and that's when you know you're like, okay, I got to honor my voice today. It's not somebody else's voice. It's just the most authentic me.
Yeah, and I'm always encouraging people because I talk to a lot of people who are just getting started and they're unsure. And one of the things that they worry about is being original. And
Yes.
I'm like,
We all
I could,
worried about that, of course.
but if I could set, well, I will be setting everyone prompts throughout May. And if like 500 people are writing a story about Cinderella, there are going to be 500 different versions. And the more that you can allow your own quirkiness, your own weirdness to come out.
Embrace the odd, I say. Yeah, I completely agree. You know, we all, I think, worry about being an original and standing out. And sometimes those are two separate things. You know, being original just means that there's nobody who's more original than you when you're just being you. No one else is going to get there. No one else can be that. They can't even copy if they tried. Um, so I think that standing out is a whole different conversation, you know, that I think that has a little bit more to do with the business side and the publishing side of writing. And we don't have control over all of that. We really don't. You know, so sometimes it's when you enter and what project you enter with. And because we can't control that, I say, doesn't really matter. You know, we've got to come to the page and do our work and try to have some joy in this and just allow that really genuine person that you are to show up in your works. That's who is going to interest us as a reader. We've already got books by somebody else. We already have short stories by somebody else and flash by somebody else. I want to read what you have. That's going to excite me. That's going to be different than anything I've ever seen.
Standing ovation. I absolutely couldn't have put it better myself. So I think we were talking before I hit record here about this weird time that we're living in.
Isn't it?
It's, yeah. And I think we both had the same experience ourselves and among our writer friends that the first few weeks of this were just sort of deer in the headlights. And then there were a couple of weeks of, I want to get back to writing, but I can't really access all of my feelings all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for a lot of people, StoryADay May is going to come along at a good time because they're itching to get back to their writing. And it's a promise of being able to work on short pieces. But a lot of the people who are experiencing this and seeing StoryADay as a way back in aren't necessarily natural short story writers. There's a lot of novelists in the community who just want a little something, you know. Yeah. So do you have advice for people who are used to going long about focusing in and turning out short things? I have somebody in the group who is a natural novelist, and she set herself the challenge last week of writing a short story, and she got it done in a week, but it was 10,000 words, and she was laughing because she's like, yeah, I know.
There are not many magazines who want a 10,000 word story. There's some. She should cut that down below 6,000. You know, that's usually my cutoff for like a sellable story.
Yeah, she was planning on it. She was planning on doing that. But, you know, like some people, it just naturally, it comes out long. And I know there are, you know, I know you've got some tips. I'm sure you've got some tips for people on how to keep it
down to pacing. When we are, you know, as an artist in fiction who likes, I like flash writing, I like short story writing, and I also like novel writing. But I know that my headspace, pacing wise, needs to be a little different. And when we're in novels, we're talking about chapters rather than short stories. And it does a disservice to assume that those are two very, very similar things, because a chapter has a lot of, he's doing a lot of work in an overall body of work. You've got to set a new goal, set a new hurdle, talk about some things that happened before, talk about some things that are coming over here, and end with a way that a reader wants to turn the page. That's creatively a different job than a short story. where the whole thing is going to happen right now. So my first piece of advice would be to just come at this as if I want to write one bubble that maybe turns into something bigger later. When you're a novelist, a lot of ideas, you can start to see the bigger spark in them and say, wait a minute, what if this was over here? And then I've got this other idea. And you start to patchwork things together. I love that magic. But for the prompts, it's so good for us just, in a way to open us and access some new things, to just come without some preconceived ideas. Just, I'm just going to write one little bubble. And to sort of pretend like that's the only bubble I get can be really freeing creatively, where it's not going to have to lead to 7 more very long chapters. No, it doesn't. I'm going to wrap this up right now. It's really exciting, I think. And then it's also free. You're not going to have to crochet an entire Afghan today. You are just working on one granny square, and that's all they get. It's a coaster. That's it. And so, just thinking about the pacing and the job of a chapter is quite different than a short story. So those two things, I think, just reset the mental, like, wait, I get to just have this one moment. And maybe it's just going to be a way to explore a character that I think might fit into the next novel. But he can have his own bubble. He can live right here in this world. And then I can use this idea somewhere else later and tweak it. A lot of times when we've done this story a day, I have maybe day 7 and day 12, I end up realizing they might be the same character, and I'm playing with something. We start to sort of piece things together, but that doesn't have to be your intention. I think having big, lofty goals during this strange time that we're writing in can be, it can be stalling. And I don't want anybody to feel stalled. We've had our kind of like shakeup, and now we're used to being in this very strange world. And it's okay to come every day in May and just allow and spend some time on your own creativity. It doesn't have to lead to anything special, but a lot of them probably are. That's how it goes. We always end up with just a really good handful of stories that we're proud of and pieces that we can see. And maybe this year it will be even more for you. If you look and see, some of these are coming up as flash pieces. Maybe there's something here that I can do in a very short form. And that's really fun.
So that's interesting. As somebody who has done the challenge many times, do you have, well, that's one tip that you have for people, like sometimes you realize you're writing about the same character, or maybe you're writing in the same world. Like, what other ways can people, what are the other discoveries have you made during the challenge that might make it seem a little less intimidating to people, or,
Yes. I think one of the fun things to do is not only experiment in trying to see what happens organically when prompted. I think that's exciting as an artist, to just say, what am I not thinking about? Because the words on the page will reveal what you were thinking about. But voice comes up for me, Julie, every single time. You start to see, after 30 days, you do see your voice on the page in all kinds of different iterations. One day you're angry and you've written this beautiful rant, and one day you're describing some beauty that you just happen to finally see outside, and one day you're sad because you never did get to say goodbye to this person. We don't have traditional funerals anymore. I know so many writers who are looking at that. I just find that such a strange moment we never thought we would live through. So whatever you're experiencing, you're going to be able to look back on these days and say, wait a minute, I can see my voice here. I understand who I am, and I want to continue honoring that voice. That matters to me. Another connection that I have made over the years, when you do these in a row, I am so much more like limber and willing and able in June to get work done. And I think that helps when I'm doing some of my longer projects too, because, I'm not intimidated. If I've written every single day for a month, which is not how the rest of the year actually looks for me, I'm in the game, man. I'm hungry for it in the morning. And it really does, June, July, things just happen. And I'm less intimidated about writing overall. So I think it's such a gift that you give to people, that we get to come and we get to participate, and we just get to, benefit from it.
That's perfect. And it makes me really happy to hear that, because that is, that's really the intention, is just to get that warm up, get that, like, I find that when I'm going through the month, the first couple of days can be tough, but once you kind of just get in that groove, it's not a question of whether you're going to write tomorrow. It's I have to write tomorrow. You just start finding ideas and stories
Yeah,
everywhere.
I really do appreciate the way that you give the prompts once a day and that there is not some pressure behind it. That just if you miss a day or if you really didn't feel like proud of what you wrote that day, it's not the point. The point is to show up. We're writers. This is a community of people. Just we're all struggling through it right now. And there might be writers who are beginning May who are still in the very shaken up stage, who are just not settled in and feel like I don't know if I even can give my time to writing just yet. Julie and I, we were talking, and I said I was afraid to get into my work because I might miss something important happening in my family or on the news. It's just such a distraction in the world right now. But it's okay. You can come and you can set your timer and give yourself this moment and get in the groove. And what we are creating right now is it's history. This is this historical moment we're living through, and what we're feeling and writing right now matters. We can look back and say, this is what came out of me during this moment. And maybe it has to do with this virus and this, change that we're all feeling in our families and our houses and not going anywhere. And maybe it doesn't, but it's going to be affected by what's happening around us. I just can't wait to look back and see what we were writing now.
Yeah, and I'm, I have a history degree, so I'm like, yes, please all write that, not even if you never publish anything, even if none of it, looks like anything you've ever written before or after. This is going to be a really interesting year to do this challenge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is a year for writers to just listen and absorb the world and write what organically comes.
Yeah, don't try and suppress, like if you might not want to write about what's coming up for you that day, but I think it's really important just to let it come out and not try and force it.
I agree. That is the authentic writer life. Just allow it.
So I want to talk a little bit about your book because it has been such a great resource for so many people. So it's Writing and Selling Short Stories and Personal Essays, the essential guide to getting your work published. And it's from Writer's Digest Books and came out a couple of years ago. And it was just so needed. There was, I'm holding out my copy of Windy Lynn here. It's just covered in sticky notes.
Like, I just wanted this information. Well, the project,
everything that was out there before this book was either on a website that somebody had thrown up, or it was just decades out of date. And so you have the only previous book I could find about this didn't even have electronic submissions. Like nobody had to email when it was written. So this book is the first part is about writing short stories. You talk about flash in here. You talk about all these things we've been talking about and more. And then in the second half, you take us through the nuts and bolts of submitting. And that's not something I want people to, really worry about during May, but there's a lot of year and there's a lot of future out there when they can be thinking about it. So there's just really great information in here. But one of the things I liked in particular, which resonated with me, is when you talk about finding markets, which can be intimidating. You encourage us to think about our goals and define our goals. Like, why are you submitting your story or your essay to magazines? And I love that. I love people defining their own version of success. So why do you think that is important?
I think it's incredibly important because it gives us a chance to reach for something. One of the hardest things to do is press that send button and push our work out to the world, especially the first time. We worry about rejection. We worry about our quality. We worry about this person on the other end of the desk. We don't know what they want from us or if they even are going to be kind to us. And so there's a lot of fear there. But if you have a goal and you've said to yourself, I want to get published in 2020, then you need to make it happen. You need to polish your stories. You need to figure out who's looking for work like yours, and you need to press the send button. So I think putting a goal out there, it just matters. It especially helps if you tell a colleague that goal. Tell a friend, a fellow writer, and say, I'm going to get published in 2020. And you can both make it happen. Absolutely. I really like that, May is a very creative time here. We're all going to be doing these prompts, and there's going to be reflection time. There's plenty of time left to revise and submit and get published by the end of the year. With Flash, sometimes it can sell very quickly, and some pieces languish a little bit longer. One of the things you can do also is think about your long-term goals. If you are a writer who says, you know what, I'd love to publish a novel someday, but I'm going to be working on shorts, I'm going to be thinking about shorts. Selling in the literary market with your short creative pieces really does open a path. It gives you something on your CV that agents think is important, that publishers think is important, and it can be a real great career path. So if you're feeling like, wait, I want to be over here, this might be a great stepping stone, then that goal feels even more urgent. Then you're thinking, of course I'm going to submit my work. Eventually I'm going to have to submit this novel. And so I want to have something great to have happen before then. And shorts can really support a career even after you've sold a book. You can have them, helping you find a new audience. You could be playing with new ideas all of the time. All of these things can happen. But for writers who are thinking that far ahead, where I maybe want to have a literary agent for this novel that I've got going on, it might be smart to really think about the magazine specifically and make sure they're in the arena that agents are reading. And two of the places I go to when I'm working with writers who say, you know what, I really want to get a top agent. Where are they reading? What are they looking at? The first is the push cart. The push cart prize happens every year to multiple writers. And what happens is literary magazines have the opportunity to submit up to 3 stories, usually per category. It would be flash fiction and creative nonfiction and short story and poem, sorry. So they've got all of these categories. They can submit on your behalf, and they will. You're really not included in that. They'll let you know if you have been nominated. And many, many, many stories are chosen. The book that comes out at the end of the year, every single year, is about 2 inches thick, full of stories. And so what I advise would be to just grab a copy at your library or, buy your own copy and take a look at what magazines are being noticed in the push cart. It means that those magazines are promoting their writers. They are finding the best work, but they're also showcasing themselves. They're saying, hey, we want to be noticed as a magazine. We want you to know that we found these amazing writers. They're submitting to the Pushcart Prize, which allows you to be part of that whole fun. And agents are going to recognize the names of those magazines. So that's a great way, if you're thinking, I want to be in that world, to be in the conversation part of the world. There's thousands of literary magazines, and not all of them are part of that world. Another great place to go would be the AWP website. It's awp.org. And the organization is a nonprofit called the Association of Writing Programs and Partners. Programs? Okay, don't quote me on the last part, but
Use programs, yeah.
Yes, it's about the world of literary shorts and small presses. So every year they have a terrific conference that happens, and about 800 literary magazines show up. It's everybody from the Paris Review to the Sun to name a magazine that you want to be in that you've probably heard of. They're probably showing up there, and you can go and meet those editors and talk about what they're looking for. Or it's really fun to go talk to people who've published you before. You'd be shocked. They do recognize your voice, and they're happy to see you. It's so flattering. You're like, oh, that is me. It's really, really fun. But to take a look on the website for AWP, take a look at those 800 magazines that are showing up. Those, again, are magazines who are trying to be known, who are promoting their writers, who are trying to stay in the conversation. So if that shows up on your CV, a literary agent is going to be nodding, going, oh, I've heard of Grant. I've heard of this place. I see that she is qualified in maybe some other ways that I didn't know about. So goals matter.
Also, that's a window that you've just given us into something I think that people don't think about as much when they're starting to write, which is this is a community. And
Community.
Every step of them, it feels like, to a certain extent, if you're submitting and being rejected, it feels like it's, this elite group of not really human people out there.
It does. It feels very impersonal at times.
Yeah, but you realize on every step I've taken, that there's a community at every stage. There's the people who you're writing with, and then you get to know people. Like I've been, I've known you for a few years now, and I feel like you're part of my community. And then you have tips and tricks, and then the publishing world itself. It's a network of people who love writing, and it seems silly that I have to say this, but it's easy to forget that community is a huge part of writing.
It really is. And I think especially in the world of shorts, it's a loving, accepting community that is, there's not enough money for it to be led by name, ego, any of those things. It's just about the work. It's always just about the work. So anybody can play in that pond and be known in this world and get to know other people and be respected by magazine editors. In the book world, things are a little different. There's an awful lot of money in the world of book selling. And so you have some other factors that you're dealing with. Even writing a great book does not mean that a great book is going to get published. But if you write a great short, it is going to get published. That's a very different world. And what I love about the world of shorts is there's a lot of crossover. You get part of this community and you meet so many people like you and I who are also novelists, who are looking down this path, who maybe have an agent here and can, lead you and give you some information. And it's just really such a joyous, non-competitive world to live in as an artist that I don't ever want to leave.
This is, yeah. I don't know why it took me so long to figure out that none of us are competitors, because you know how fast you probably read really quickly. I read really quickly. Like I just want more writers, more books, more stories.
Voracious, and there is nobody who can write what you wrote when you wrote it. There's no competition. It's up to you as an artist to finish your work, polish your work, and then if you feel like you want it to be in the world, you're the one in charge. You put it out in the world. You make the contacts. You submit your work. You find an agent. All of those things. It's always up to us. There's really nobody can take that from you.
So empowering, so inspiring. Thank you so much. And tell me a little bit about what you're working on next.
Well, I've got a couple of short stories out. My agent is doing some submissions on my behalf for some longer short stories. It's the first time we're doing that together. And she had this hilarious thing to say. She said, Windy, I'm pretty sure getting any word back from literary magazines is longer than it takes me to get word back on an entire novel from a publishing editor. And she's right. The world of literary magazines, the shorter you write, the faster it sells, tends to be my personal experience. So the longer stories that I have out right now, one is about 6,000 words and one is closer to 4,000 words. It's been 8 months now and we're getting nice no's in a couple of places, but only a couple of places. So just know that as part of, the world of literary, selling shorts. Finally, I've got my agent kind of doing some of that, introduction for me. It's not faster. I just assumed it would be. It is not going to be. So we've got these shorts that I'm really excited about. I'm working on some flash pieces regularly. That just keeps me sane and keeps me working. But I've got 2 novels on my desk as well. So I'm in a couple of different worlds. I'm writing very short, I'm writing somewhat long, and I'm writing novel length. So I really enjoy the variety of that. But I do remind myself when I'm going to step into a project, what is the cadence and what is the purpose of what I'm writing? Is it a bubble or is it a chapter? And I like having some variety. So that's what's going on over at my desk.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been so valuable and stuffed with information and inspiration. So thank you so much, Windy Lynn Harris.
Thank you for having me, Julie. I'm sure looking forward to StoryADay in May. You'll see me.
Well, if that hasn't got you excited and full of ideas and possibilities for StoryADay, I don't know what else I can do. If you haven't signed up yet and would like to get all of the writing prompts during May, just come over to storyaday.org, sign up at that box at the front. All of the prompts are appearing at the blog. If you sign up, you'll get them by email. It's going to be a great month. We're going to be writing and just an outpouring of creativity. So I hope you'll join us. And in the meantime, keep writing. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime,
Have a great creative week. And of course, keep writing.